Frederick III was King of Denmark and Norway from 1648 until his death. He also governed under the name Frederick II as diocesan administrator of the Prince-Bishopric of Verden and the Prince-Archbishopric of Bremen. He instituted absolute monarchy in Denmark-Norway in 1660, confirmed by law in 1665 as the first in Western historiography. He also ordered the creation of the throne chair of Denmark. He was born the second eldest son of Christian IV and Anne Catherine of Brandenburg. Frederick was only considered an heir to the throne after the death of his older brother Prince Christian in 1647. In order to be elected king after the death of his father, Frederick conceded significant influence to the nobility. As king, he fought 2 wars against Sweden. He was defeated in the Dano-Swedish War of 1657–1658, but attained great popularity when he weathered the 1659 assault on Copenhagen and won the Dano-Swedish War of 1658–1660. Later that year, Frederick used his popularity to disband the elective monarchy in favor of absolute monarchy, which lasted until 1848 in Denmark. He married Sophie Amalia of Brunswick-Luneburg, with whom he fathered Christian V of Denmark. Early years. Frederick was born at Haderslev in Slesvig, the son of Christian IV and Anne Catherine of Brandenburg. In his youth and early manhood, there was no prospect of his ascending the Danish throne, as his older brother Christian was elected heir apparent in 1608. Frederick was educated at Sorrow Academy and studied in the Netherlands and France. As a young man, he demonstrated an interest in theology, natural sciences, and Scandinavian history. He was a reserved and enigmatic prince who seldom laughed, spoke little, and wrote less, a striking contrast to Christian IV. Even though he lacked the impulsive and jovial qualities of his father, Frederick possessed the compensating virtues of moderation and self-control. On the 1st of October 1643, Frederick wed Sophie Amalia of Brunswick-Luneburg, the daughter of George, Duke of Brunswick-Luneburg, who had an energetic, passionate, and ambitious character. He was an enthusiastic collector of books, and his collection became the foundation for the Copenhagen Royal Library. Early offices. In his youth, Frederick became the instrument of his father's political schemes in the Holy Roman Empire. He was granted administration of the Prince-Archbishopric of Bremen, the Prince-Bishopric of Verden, and named coadjutor of the Bishopric of Halberstadt. Thus, from an early age, he had considerable experience as an administrator. At the age of 18, he was the chief commandant of the Bremian fortress of Stade. During the Torstenson War of 1643–45, Frederick lost control of his possessions within the empire. He was then appointed commander in the royal shares in the duchies of Schleswig and Holstein by his father. His command was not successful, chiefly owing to his quarrels with the Earl Marshal Anders Bill, who commanded the Danish forces. This was Frederick's first collision with the Danish nobility, who afterwards regarded him with extreme distrust. Reign. Proclaimed king. The death of his elder brother Christian in June 1647 opened the possibility for Frederick to be elected heir apparent to the Danish throne. However, this issue was still unsettled when Christian IV died on the 28th of February 1648. After long deliberation among the Danish estates and in the Rigsrådet, he was finally accepted as his father's successor. On the 6th of July, Frederick received the homage of his subjects, and he was crowned on the 23rd of November. However, due to misgivings about the rule of Christian IV, as well as Frederick's previous confrontational administrations in Bremen and Verden and his quarrels with Anders Bill, he was only elected after he had signed a Handfæstning charter. The Handfæstning included provisions curtailing the already diminished royal prerogative in favor of increased influence for the Rigsrådet. In the first years of his reign, the Rigsrådet was the main power center of Danish politics. However, Frederick wielded more effective power than what the Håndfæstning officially granted. He eventually succeeded in removing the two most influential members of the Rigsrådet from office in 1651, his brothers-in-law Corfitz Ulfeldt and Hannibal Sehested. Ulfeldt went into exile in Sweden where he turned traitor, while Sehested was restored to favor in 1660. Defeated by Sweden with all his good qualities, Frederick was not a man to recognize fully his own limitations and that of his country, but he rightly regarded the accession of Charles X of Sweden on 6 June 1654 as a source of danger to Denmark. He felt that temperament and policy would combine to make Charles an aggressive warrior king. The only uncertainty was in which direction he would turn his arms first. Charles's invasion of Poland in July 1655 came as a distinct relief to Frederick, even though the Polish War was full of latent peril to Denmark. Frederick was resolved upon a rupture with Sweden at the first convenient opportunity. When Riksdagen assembled on 23 February 1657, it willingly granted considerable subsidies for mobilization and other military expenses. On 23 April he received the assent of the majority of Rigsrådet to attack Sweden's German dominions. In the beginning of May, the still pending negotiations with that power were broken off, and on 1 June Frederick signed the manifesto justifying a war which was never formally declared. The Swedish king confounded all the plans of his enemies with the march across the belts in January and February 1658. The effect of this unheard-of achievement of crossing the frozen sea to invade Danish territory was crushing. Frederick at once sued for peace. Yielding to the persuasions of the English and French ministers, Charles finally agreed to be content with mutilating, instead of annihilating, the Danish monarchy. The Treaty of Tastrup was signed on 18 February and the Treaty of Roskilde on 26 February 1658. The conclusion of peace was followed by a remarkable episode. Frederick expressed the desire to make the personal acquaintance of his conqueror, and Charles X consented to be his guest for 3 days, the 3rd of March to the 5th of March, at Frederiksborg Palace. Splendid banquets lasting far into the night and intimate conversations between princes who had only just emerged from a mortal struggle seemed to point to nothing but peace and friendship in the future. Assault on Copenhagen repelled but Charles's insatiable lust for conquest and his ineradicable suspicion of Denmark induced him to endeavor to dispatch an inconvenient neighbor without any reasonable cause, a declaration of war in defiance of all international standards of acceptable behavior on the part of rulers. Terror was the first feeling produced at Copenhagen by the landing of the main Swedish army at Korsør on Zealand on 17 July 1658. None had anticipated the possibility of such a sudden and brutal attack, and everyone knew that the Danish capital was very inadequately fortified and garrisoned. During this war, Frederick attained great popularity in the general public, as he rebuked the advice of his councillors to flee Copenhagen with the memorable words, "I will die in my nest," and actively led the defense of the city. On 8 August, representatives from all estates in the capital urged the necessity of a vigorous resistance, and the citizens of Copenhagen, headed by the mayor Hans Nansen, protested their unshakable loyalty to the king and a determination to defend Copenhagen to the uttermost. The Danes had only 3 weeks of warning of the approaching danger, and the vast and dilapidated line of defense had at first only 2,000 regular defenders. But the government and the people displayed a memorable and exemplary energy under the constant supervision of the king and queen and Mayor Nansen. By the beginning of September, all the breaches were repaired, the walls bristled with cannons, and 7,000 men were under arms. So strong was the city by this time that Charles X, abandoning his original intention of carrying the place by assault, began a regular siege. This he also was forced to abandon when an auxiliary Dutch fleet reinforced and reprovisioned the garrison and defeated him on the 29th of October in the Battle of the Sound. The Dutch then assisted in the liberation of the Danish Isles in 1659. Thus, the Danish capital had saved the Danish monarchy. The war was ended by the Treaty of Copenhagen in May 1660, which confirmed the cession of Scania, Halland, and Bleking from the Treaty of Roskilde, while Bornholm and parts of Schleswig reverted to Denmark. Absolute monarchy. Frederick III profited by his spirited defense of the common interests of the country and the dynasty. The traditional loyalty of the Danish middle classes was transformed into enthusiasm for the king personally, and for a brief period Frederick found himself the most popular man in his kingdom. He made use of his popularity by converting the elective monarchy into an absolute monarchy by the Revolution of 1660. To ensure this conversion, he instituted the 1660 state of emergency in Denmark. At the September 1660 gathering of the estates, intended to solve the financial problems faced after the wars, Frederick played the different estates against each other. He succeeded in gaining support for the hereditary monarchy, the annulment of the Handfæstning, and the institution of absolute monarchical rule by decree. During the last 10 years of his reign, the king again took a relatively obscure position while the new monarchy was built up and the country tried to recover after the wars. New men came into government, which was marked by a rivalry between the ministers and councillors like Hannibal Sehested and Christopher Gabel. Frederick concentrated on changing the administrative structure from chancellery to resort colleges, and replaced the administrative divisions of fiefs with AMT counties. In 1665, the Kongeloven was introduced, the constitution of Danish absolute monarchy, and the first assertion of divine right underpinned by a written constitution in Europe. It decreed that the monarch shall from this day forth be revered and considered the most perfect and supreme person on the earth by all his subjects, standing above all human laws and having no judge above his person, neither in spiritual nor temporal matters, except God alone. Quote, this law consequently authorized the king to abolish all other centers of power. Most important was the abolition of the Council of the Realm. In 1665, Frederick had an opportunity to repay the Netherlands for the support, by protecting the return fleet from the Dutch East Indies from the English navy. The English had blocked the English Channel, forcing the return fleet to sail all around the British Isles. The Dutch took refuge in Bergen, Norway, pursued by English warships, but they was protected by the fortress of the harbour, whose commander treated them as Danish allies. The English urged Frederick to seize the return fleet for himself, claiming that it was more valuable than the whole of his kingdom. Instead of protecting the Dutch, Frederick agreed to collaborate with the English in seizing the return fleet. But before the Danish fleet word of the deal reached Bergen, the English attacked, and were defeated in the Battle of Vagen by the Dutch, supported by the fortress. Frederick III died at Copenhagen Castle and is interred in Roskilde Cathedral. Titles and styles. The 1st of May 1648 to 9 February 1670, His Majesty the King, by the grace of God, King of Denmark and Norway, the Wends and the Goths, Duke of Schleswig, Holstein, Stormarn and Dithmarschen, Count of Oldenburg and Delmenhorst. Issue. With Sophia Amalia of Brunswick-Luneburg he had the following children. Also, he had with Margareta Pepe one illegitimate son, Ulrich Frederick Gidenlove. Ancestry.